Okay. Hey, hipsters. What's up? It's Blake, the hipster Highlander, back for another episode of Budget Brewsday. Thanks again for joining me. This is a series that's about building on a budget, building with unique cards that you don't often see in Commander. And it's kind of a series that's inspired by just getting tired of seeing some staples and getting a little bit more creative, while also having a little bit of sustainability in mind. If you'd like to join the community, we have a Discord. It's linked in the description, along with the deck list. You'll see it in the description. Hope you enjoy your time. Let's talk about what we're doing today. Today, we're building a $25 deck on Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius. He's blue and a green for a 2/3 Bear Druid. Spells you cast from your graveyard or exile cost 2 less to cast, and plotting cards from your hand cost 2 less to cast. Okay, so let's talk about Doc a little bit before we get into what we can do with him. Making spells cost 2 less to cast is a huge discount, obviously. Even just making spells cost 1 less to cast can sometimes be pretty insane / broken. So now, and the plotting 2 cards, this is kind of like a bear with sets mechanic thing. There are very few cards with plot currently because it's just the sets mechanic and it's only in 2 of the colors of the set. So we're not going to be doing a whole lot of plotting, spoiler alert. But spells cast from your graveyard or from exile cost 2 less to cast is a really huge discount. Now, this commander obviously doesn't have like the current day standard of like payoff plus, value engine. So we have to do a little bit of work here, but that's what I like to do. That's what I like to build from. So let's take a look at what the average Doc Arlock deck looks like on EDH Rec. So we start scrolling down here. Obviously, seeing some plot cards, as you'd probably expect. The weird thing with plot and Doc is that even though he makes the plot cheaper, there are some cards that are in here for some reason, like Make Your Own Luck, that put cards on plot and don't actually work with the commander, which is very weird. So I don't really understand that. A lot of these plot cards don't really have like direct synergy. This one cares about spells. This one cares about big creatures. This one cares about playing things off the top of your library. Nothing here really directly synergizes. Plus, there's not that many plot cards, so a few of these will make it into the deck, but we're not really too enthused with what I'm seeing there. There's also a lot of foretell cards, which Doc does work with, but most of them are just kind of uninspiring, not very interesting, bad. Like Battle Mammoth, that sort of stuff. So, most of the time, foretell's not really going to do it. It technically works, but there's not very many options for that. A lot of adventure as well, which notably Doc doesn't work when you cast the adventure side of the spell because you are playing that from your hand. He will help you cast the other part of the spell off of exile that's on the adventure, which is most of the time just a big vanilla creature that doesn't really matter. And the spell side of the card is usually just some fairly normal value, like this, like Beanstalk Giant ramps you. Tinkali Hunter cares about playing things from exile, which is like okay, but works mostly with other adventure cards. Foretell cards you already paid the mana for, so doesn't really work with those. Plot it doesn't really work with, so it's kind of a weird include, it seems like. Once again, more adventure cards, plot cards. So kind of scrolling through this looks like just a big mess. Just very little synergy for a lot of the stuff I'm seeing here. But I do know that there's a long history of flashback cards. So that got me thinking, okay, what can we do from our graveyard? Since that's the most useful use of your mana on this card. There's lots of things that play things from graveyards, casting from graveyards, have flashback. So that seems to be the most reliable route for me. So I started taking a look around on Scryfall, and I started with being able to cast from your graveyard as my tag. And then I started seeing some things I was interested in. Lots of spells with lots of different utility. Some are just card draw. Some make creatures. Some bring things back from the graveyard, make self-mill, get you more dudes, self-mill, graveyard hate. So this is what got me definitely most interested. So I started doing some playing around with some things, and here is what I ended up with. So this is our $25 Doc Arlock deck that we landed on. We have kind of a general strategy of basically self-mill into card draw and everything else. We have lots of different outlets for all of our interaction, from graveyard synergy to you name it. So let's kind of get started with what we got going on. Probably the best place to start is the self mill, just show how we're going to get our engine online. We have kind of just a suite of spell slingery sort of cards, because most of the flashback cards are generally instant or sorceries. So let's start off with Consider. It's a 1 blue mana instant with Surveil 1, draw a card. Pretty simple card, smooths out our draws, helps get things in the graveyard. We have 2 enchantments that basically do the same thing: Crawling Infestation and Crawling Sensation. At the beginning of your upkeep, they're 2 and a green. At the beginning of your upkeep, you mill 2 cards, and then whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you get a 1/1 green insect. This ability only triggers once each turn. Crawling Sensation does the same thing, but just cares about lands. These will give us long-term, good, consistent mill, as well as just some not meaningless 1/1s that we'll use to great effect in different ways later, whether it's trump blockers or maybe even part of our win condition. So absolutely excellent cards for the deck. Dream Twist. Now this is going to kind of show you the the route that I'm kind of thinking with the deck, because this is obviously a pretty bad card on its face. Dream Twist is a 1 blue mana instant. Target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard, and it has flashback for 1 and a blue. Now, this card doesn't really seem like it does very much. But the important thing is it helps fuel our graveyard. It's a card we can easily play from our graveyard for 1 blue mana as well with our commander out. It'll just help us churn through our deck, put lots of value in our graveyard. So yeah, you're going to see very strange cards like this one in the deck. So that's how deep we're going here. But I think we have something pretty effective here. Next up, Druidic Ritual. 2 and a green for a sorcery. You may mill 3 cards. Then you may return up to 1 creature and up to 1 land from your graveyard to your hand. That's great. It's a nice little 2-for-1. Helps put cards in our graveyard. Frantic Search. It's classic. 2 and a blue for an instant. Draw 2 cards. Discard 2 cards. Untap 3 lands. You go down a card in the exchange, but you don't lose any mana, and you get a lot of selection and graveyard synergies. So great. Grapple with the Past. 1 and a green for an instant. Mill 3 cards. Then you may return a creature or a land card from your graveyard to your hand. Once again, it's basically cantrips and gets us back something from a large selection. Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. I know you can't really tell, but that's the name of the card. I don't know why half it's covered up with the art. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Siren Pirate with flash and flying. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you put a counter on it. Then you draw a card and discard a card. If there are 4 counters on it, the card that you discard, you can play for free if you'd like. Looters are nice for smoothing our draws. We don't have very many of them in the deck. I kind of goldfished this deck a lot and tried it. I wasn't really happy with too many of them, but I left a few in here just to, kept kind of just smooth out draws and such. Mission Briefing, blue for an instant. Surveil 2, then you may choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. You may cast it this turn. If a spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. So we can give anything in our graveyard flashback, which is excellent. We try to have as much flashback in our graveyard as we can to work with our commander. But this can allow things that wouldn't normally be able to be played from the graveyard and would normally be able to be discounted with our commander, work with our commander. And it helps kind of self-mill us a little bit. So that's excellent. Mulch, one of my favorite cards. 1 and a green for a sorcery. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put any lands into your hand, and then the rest go into your graveyard. So that's excellent for us. Gives us lands to play. Self-mills, great. Otherworldly Gaze. I basically treat this as second Dream Twist. This one's obviously slightly better. It's 1 blue mana instant for Surveil 3, which means you can look at the top 3 of your library, and you can put a number of them in your graveyard. And it has flashback for 1 and a blue. During my gold fishing, I was so impressed with this card that's kind of why I went to Dream Twist. And then after I started gold fishing with Dream Twist, I was like, oh yeah, this is the same thing. Corporate wants you to identify the difference between these 2 pictures. They're the same picture. Perpetual Timepiece. It's a 2 mana artifact. You can tap it to mill 2 cards. And then you can pay 2 and exile to shuffle a number of cards from your graveyard into your library. We don't really care about doing that too much. But yeah, just consistent self-mill, just like Crawling Sensation and Infestation. That's great for us. Pieces of the puzzle. It's 2 and a blue for a sorcery. You reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You put 2 instant and or sorcery cards from among them into your hand, and the rest go into your graveyard. We have, I think, 40, maybe just over 40 instants and sorceries. So this is almost always going to hit for us. At least one, most of the time, too. Puts tons of cards in our graveyard. It's great. Satyr Wayfinder. It's 1 and a green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and you can put a land from among them into your hand and put the rest in your graveyard. It's great. It's a little cantripping dude that mills a bunch of cards. Excellent. Shigeki Jukai Visionary, 1 and a green for a 1/3. Legendary enchantment creature Snake Druid. 2023 Magic, baby. Oh, I guess it's technically 2022. Whatever. Modern Magic, we just don't have room for anything on the card besides just rules text. 1 and a green, and you tap it and return it to your hand. That's the cost. You reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You can put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped. The rest go into your graveyard. And then you can pay double X green and discard it. Return X target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. This card's just awesome in every deck that it's in. It offers you ramp, consistent mill, and it even gives you an outlet to use a bunch of your mana to get whatever you want back from your graveyard. So Shigeki is an all-star. Thought Scour, 1 blue mana for an instant. Target player mills 2 cards from their graveyard, from their library into their graveyard. That's always going to be us. And then you draw a card. So you don't even go down a card on the exchange. Notably, Mental Note, which is the same card that just doesn't allow you to target your opponent. That card's like $4. Otherwise, that card would be in the deck too. But yeah, Thought Scour, all-star. Tracker's Instincts, 1 and a green for a sorcery. You reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put a creature card from among them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. And it has flashback for 2 and a blue. We have about 20 creatures in the deck, so there will definitely be times where this will miss, but it's still worth it. When we mill it, it's just free extra mill. If we draw it, we are most likely, by the time we cast it twice, which only costs us 3 mana with our commander out, we should hit a creature by then. And it just puts so many cards in the graveyard, so it's excellent. Winding Way, this is basically the same card as Mulch, but better. It's 1 and a green for a sorcery. You choose creature or land, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put all the cards of the chosen type revealed this way and into your hand, and the rest go into your graveyard. This one just gives you the option of being able to choose creatures too, which, like I said, we don't really have a ton of, but if you really just are swamped on mana and you just need to find something to do, you can try to name creatures and try to hit something. Okay, so that's kind of the basis. This gives us a kind of ground level understanding of the self mill. As you can see, there's lots of instants and sorceries here. I have cards that care about instants and sorceries. So it's going to kind of influence what we're trying to do. We're definitely going to lean into kind of a spell slinging sort of outlet as we get into this more and more. And we're not really trying to, as you can see, nothing here mills us like 20 cards. There's no mesmeric orb here or anything like that. All the cards that mill you tons of cards are generally a bit more pricey in terms of money. So we're trying to like slowly accumulate more and more cards in our graveyard and then use those cards for their flashback costs. So we're never sitting there with a ton of cards in our graveyard. And that kind of influenced my decision in some of the cards that I cut, which we'll get to whenever we get to the considering side of things. Get it? But yeah, we basically, we're not like a graveyard deck in the sense where we're trying to get to like 40 cards in our graveyard and flash them all back or bring all the creatures back into play. We're more like incrementally milling. We'll have maybe 10 cards in our graveyard. We'll use some of them. It'll go back down to 5 cards in our graveyard. Then we'll mill some more. And so it's just kind of used as an extra resource where we get some extra value here and there based on the situation that we can use whatever we need at the time. So that's kind of the self mill, and we'll run into some more mill cards as we kind of go along. But these are basically the cards that I've dedicated as dedicated self mill. So next, let's go into what wants to be milled. These are cards that, I mean, obviously we hit some flashback cards along here that also do milling, but this is where we get into the kind of meat of things, where we get to how we're going to actually generate card advantage from all this milling. So first off, we have Chemist's Insight. It's 3 and a blue for an instant. It says draw 2 cards, and then it has Jumpstart, which means you can cast from your graveyard by discarding a card, in addition to paying its other cost, and then flashback, and then exile this card. So it's basically flashback, but you have to discard a card, which that's totally fine with us. We pay 4 up front or 2 from the graveyard. Yeah, it's excellent. Generates us plenty of card advantage for a very efficient rate for what we're trying to do. Croaking Counterpart, 1 green and a blue for a sorcery. It's a creature token that it creates a creature token that's a copy of target non-frog creature, except it's a 1/1 green frog. And it has flashback for 3 green and a blue. There's a few cards like this that you can play, but this is the one I decided on because it's the most efficient. And if we're going to copy something our opponents have, we mostly just care about getting like ETB, whatever value that they got going on too. And I don't want too much of that because we might get bogged down because we don't have a ton of creatures that are worth copying ourselves. They're just kind of synergy pieces, and some of them are legendary. So even if we copy them, it doesn't really work. So Croaking Counterpart's kind of a nice little utility card here. The size of the creature doesn't really matter. The fact that it just produces a creature that gives us some value and cool ETBs or whatever is nice. Deep Analysis, it's 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards. And it has flashback for 1 blue and pay 3 life. So this one's even really cheap if we don't even have our commander out, if we mill it. But Deep Analysis is just a absolute all-star in graveyard-based blue decks. Great card advantage for us. Dryad's Revival, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and it has flashback for 4 and a green. So this gives us some nice utility. Once again, if we have something in our graveyard we need back, like our payoffs that we'll get into shortly, or something else that we can't normally flash back, this gives us a way to get it back pretty easily without having to ever actually draw this card. We can just mill it. If we do draw it, that's still great, but if we mill it, that's also great. Glimpse of Freedom, 1 and a blue for an instant, draw a card. And it also has Escape for 2 and a blue and exile 5 of their cards from your graveyard, which means you can cast this card from your graveyard, but unlike Flashback where this card gets exiled, you have to exile other cards. Well, I guess, you have to exile other cards. So this is a nice little card if we're consistently building up a lot of cards in our graveyard, but they don't really necessarily have flashback themselves or things that we can do with them right now. We can turn them into consistent card draw. 1 blue mana consistently to draw a card is great. It'll really smooth out our games a lot. Memory Deluge, 2 blue for an instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana you spent to cast the spell. You put 2 of them in your hand. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. And it has flashback for 5 blue. Normally, the flashback cost 7 mana is a little tough. 5 mana with our commander is definitely a little bit more bearable. Even though you get to see more cards when you flash it back for more mana, obviously we'd rather... Seeing 5 cards is still plenty to see. And we still will get the 2 best cards out of that. So, once again, excellent card advantage. Una's Grace. This one's very similar to a Glimpse of Freedom. It's 2 and a blue for an instant. Target player draws a card, and it has Retrace, which means you can cast the spell from your graveyard by discarding a land in addition to paying its other costs. So notably, this one never exiles itself or anything else. You just need to have a land to discard. What's really nice about this card is once we get to a point where we're drawing excess lands and we need things to do, every land that we draw for 1 blue mana can turn into a new card, and we can just keep doing that. So if we keep chaining into lands and we're like, crap, we just need some other stuff, then this is awesome for that. Next up, Scour of All Possibilities, 1 and a blue for a sorcery, scry 2, draw a card, and then it has flashback for 4 and a blue. So obviously the flashback cost is pretty steep on this one. Our commander making it 3 mana is a little bit more palatable. But once again, this is just for consistency, making sure we have plenty of things to do with our mana, lots of selection, just getting all of our little cantrips in while triggering our spells, payoff synergies. So Scour All Possibilities is great. Skyway Robber, 3 and a blue for a bird rogue. It's a 3/3 with flying. And it has Escape for 3 and a blue and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. Okay, this is going to take a second to read this long ability. Sky Robber escapes with... When Skyway Robber deals combat damage to a player, you may cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery card from among the cards exiled with Skyway Robber without paying its mana cost. Okay, very weird ability, but basically what happens is you pay 4 or 2 with your commander, which is really good. And you want to eat some number of artifact, instant, or sorcery spells, ideally ones that you can't already cast with flashback or whatever. And then if this bird hits somebody, you get to cast one of them for free. I would recommend only putting like 1 or 2, like probably like 2, maybe 3 cards and one of them you would really like to cast, and the other 2 are like kind of okay, whatever. If I get to them, I get to them. Especially ones, once again, that don't have flashback on their own. This bird is a little iffy because you really want this thing to have haste, because you just play a 3/3 that sits there, and if you have a scary spell under it, people are going to kill it. But otherwise, it's just a pretty good value. It allows us to get back things from our graveyard that we can't normally. As you can see, we have lots of ways to get back instants and sorceries and stuff like that. But when it comes to artifacts or enchantments, some of those are still pretty good, and we'd like to have them back. And this gives us an outlet to do that, while also maybe generating us some advantage some other ways. Start the TARDIS, 1 and a blue for a sorcery, surveil 2, and then draw a card. You may planeswalk. Obviously, the planeswalk's not relevant here. And then it has Jumpstart. So once again, that means you can cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs. And then you exile this card. So I don't really want to add this Universes Beyond card into my deck, but for functionality for you at home, it will definitely be really great for your deck, because once again, Surveil is really great for us. It allows us to get some card selection while still putting something in the graveyard that we care about. And it still cantrips. So if we mill it for free, then we just get a card back for no card cost of our own. So Start the TARDIS fits us perfectly. Tapping at the window, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. The rest go into your graveyard, and it has flashback for 2 and a green. So if this card sounds familiar, it's because it's basically the same thing as Tracker's Instincts, but you can put it in a mono green deck, and you see 1 less card with it. So obviously it's worse, but once again, we just want the consistent mill. And this one at least still has smaller chance to even cantrip, but just mills us more cards from the graveyard, gives us spell triggers, stuff like that. Think Twice. We found the deck for Think Twice. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. Draw a card, and it has flashback for 2 and a blue. With our commander, that's just 1 blue. That's excellent. This card's a really good role player. It's not normally a very strong card, just 2 mana intensive. And it doesn't give you enough value for the mana that you invest in it. But still, it's an excellent card for our deck. It's a perfect role player. Timeless Witness. It's 2 green for a human shaman. It's a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and it has Eternalize for 5 green. So Eternalize, very notably, is not a cast, so that will not get reduced with our commander. Eternalize basically says you exile this card from your graveyard, you pay the Eternalize cost, and you get a 4/4 token copy of this creature. So you're not actually casting this card. However, it's still a very good card to self-mill, and it gives us our entire graveyard to select from whatever we want to give us value, and we can get that for free from our graveyard. We have plenty of ways to generate mana, where 7 mana is not really a problem still. This isn't like what we ideally want to be doing, is paying 7 mana to Eternalize this, but when you got to do it, you're going to be very thankful that you can. So Timeless Witness is just a nice role player here. Turn the Earth, 1 green mana for an instant. You choose 3 target cards in graveyards. The owners of those cards shuffle them into their libraries. You gain 2 life, and then it has flashback for 1 and a green. This is mostly graveyard hate, even though sometimes people will think, oh, obviously I want to shuffle these cards back into my library. You don't really want to do that. You want to use this on something it's an instant, notably, very important. So when somebody goes to try to reanimate something from your graveyard, from their graveyard, wherever, you can get them and get that card out of their graveyard and shuffle it back into their library. It only costs 1 green mana to cast from your hand, only 1 green mana from your graveyard with your commander out. There's another version of this card called Memory's Journey. Didn't quite make the cut. I felt okay with just one of them. Memory's Journey is a little worse for this deck because it's 2 on the top side for the CMC, and it's 1 to flashback. Where I'd rather have the cheaper cost be on the actual main card, because our commander already discounts the bottom effect. So basically the discount with our commander works out better with this card compared to Memory's Journey. So yeah, Memory's Journey didn't quite make the cut. I felt good with 1, but if you're in a very graveyard heavy meta, you could pretty easily run both and feel pretty good about it. But yeah, graveyard hate's always important. So if we can get graveyard hate just from what we're already doing, milling, casting spells, that's great. That's what we want to do. Vengeful Regrowth, another new card. 4 green for a sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Create that many 4/2 green plant warrior tokens with reach. And it has flashback for 6 green. Very powerful card. Puts a lot of power and toughness on the board. Gives you really great blockers with reach that trade up very well. It even has flashback. The flashback cost goes down to its normal CMC with our commander out. excellent role player. Glad this card's so cheap, as it should be. So excellent. So you've kind of seen the kind of basis of what we're forming here. We have a lot of self-mill, a lot of cards that want to be milled. A lot of these are spell slingy sort of cards, lots of instant sorceries that you get to cast twice. So now we're going to kind of get into the meat of things, what we're trying to actually do to like win the game with these sort of things. And first of all, before we get into that, wouldn't be a Brewsday without a good brew. So hopefully you're enjoying a nice adult beverage with me. Once again, this week I'm drinking a Lagunitas IPA. So yeah, cheers to y'all. Get a little drink break here. That's good stuff. Okay. So what are we building up to? We're kind of a spell slingery sort of deck. So let's talk about some of our spell payoffs that we have. First up, the classic Archmage Emeritus. So glad this card keeps getting reprinted. This one's the one where we're kind of stretching the budget a little bit for. This one and the next card. It's 2 blue for a 2/2 human wizard with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery card, you draw a card. So this is going to generate us a ton of card advantage with all of our spell slingery stuff. Cast this spell, trigger it, flash it back, trigger it. It's going to accumulate a lot of cards. Now, just know that this card is a lightning rod. People know that this thing needs to die when it comes out. So recommend playing it when you can cast 1 or 2 spells along with it, just to make sure you're not super far down on card advantage. Next up, Docent of Perfection, another one that we're stretching a budget for a little bit. It's 3 blue for a 5/4 insect horror with flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery card, you create a 1/1 blue human wizard creature token. And then, if you control 3 or more wizards, transform Docent of Perfection into, in final iteration, it's a 6/5 flyer. Wizards you control get +2/+1 in flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you do the thing again. You make a 1/1 human wizard. So this card's obviously insane. And in case you forgot, our commander really likes this card. We make lots of dudes with our commander. Our spells get really cheap. We start making a lot of wizards, and then they start flying and killing our opponents very quickly. So absolute all-star in this deck. This one is kind of over the dollar limit as well. So if you're on a hyper strict budget where you don't even want cards over $1, then it's going to be pretty hard to come by spells payoffs. These are about the cheapest ones you can come by. Luckily, they're the best ones because they also get reprinted a bunch, which is great. Likewise, Metallurgic Summonings, 3 blue for an enchantment. When you cast an instant or sorcery card spell, create an XX colorless construct artifact creature token where X is that spell's converted mana cost. 3 blue, exile Metallurgic Summonings. Return all instant sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand, but you can only activate this ability if you control 6 or more artifacts. We're not really going to have 6 or more artifacts, spoiler alert. So this is basically another version of Docent of Perfection. Our spells start making dudes, and then our dudes hopefully accumulate enough to start killing people. And we have a few ways to push that as well. So once again, token generator, when we cast spells, you're going to see a few more of those. That's what we're looking for. That's how we're going to kind of convert these spells into board presence and maybe a win condition / that's what our plan is. Murmuring Mystic, 3 and a blue for a 1/5 human wizard. When you cast instant or sorcery, you make a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. Good for all the same reasons as the previous 2 cards. Octavia Living Thesis, 8 blue for an elemental octopus. It's an 8/8 with ward 8. This spell costs 8 less to cast if you have 8 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, target creature has base power toughness 8/8 until end of turn. Man, this card is a house. It's basically hexproof. It just has to get board wiped. And if you have any sort of other board presence, all of it starts turning into 8/8s out of nowhere. That's dangerous. Notably, if they already have flying from something like Murmuring Mystic, then they still have that flying. So that's a big problem for your opponents. One thing to note, like I said, we do like to use our graveyards. So having 8 instants or sorceries in your graveyard is like a little... It's not the easiest thing to do because you really want to cast and convert those cards in your graveyard into value. So this one's a little iffy. You kind of got to once you kind of hit that point where you draw it or you mill it or something, and then you have a ways to get it back, that's when you want to start planning. Okay, I can't really cast all these instant or sorcery. I want to let them build up and then cast this card for 2 and then start flashing these things back. So it's kind of like a little push and pull that the deck has, but it's 100% worth it. It is absolutely nuts when you get it to stick. Secrets of the Dead, 2 and a blue for an enchantment. When you cast a spell from your graveyard, draw a card. As you can probably tell at this point, that's what we want to do. So that's excellent. It's kind of like another version of Archmage Emeritus, basically. But this one's an enchantment, so this one's even harder to kill. But we can't hit this one with our tapping at the window and Traveler's stuff. So this one's obviously a little bit... It's very synergistic with our deck, but it's not as easy to convert it from our graveyard to our hand if I mill it. So we don't want too many cards like that, but this one is definitely worth it. And then lastly, in our spell payoff section, we have Tolerant Sky Summoner. Sounds very familiar to the other cards we've been talking about. It's 2 blue for a 2/2. When you cast an instant or sorcery card, you make a 2/2 Drake creature token with flying. So that's excellent. That's everything that we want, as well, all the same reasons that we've listed. Okay, so let's kind of talk about a few more things that we got going on. We got some ramp here that we need. We got some dedicated card advantage. We have quite a bit of card advantage that was in the wants to be milled section. But we have some other things that we have going on here. And then lastly, we have some interaction and a finisher to kind of round us out. Also, notably, this should have been in the want to be milled section, but we have Secrets of the Key. It's 1 blue mana for an instant. You investigate, which means you make a clue token. And if you cast this spell from your graveyard, you make 2 clues instead. And the flashback is 2 and a blue. So for our commander, it's only 2 mana. Very similar to all the other cool cards that we were talking about. It's a card that wants to be milled, gives us card advantage. Even though this one's a bit mana intensive, it's still very good. Still what we want to be doing. All right, so let's talk about card advantage next. Then we'll go into the ramp. So for card advantage, let's talk Dig Through Time. Blue staple, 6 blue for an instant. Delve, which means you can exile cards from your graveyard to help pay for the colorless mana cost of this spell. You look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So very importantly, once again, this kind of eats away at our graveyard. Kind of goes into the theme of not building up tons of cards in our graveyard. So it's definitely worth it. It's tons of synergy. Makes a giant idiot with our metallurgic summonings. So yeah, excellent card. In a similar vein, we have Treasure Cruise. It's 7 and a blue for a sorcery with Delve, and it draws us 3 cards. These cards allow us to convert our graveyard into lots of cards in our hand, lots of selection. And they're instants and sorceries, so they work with our spell slinger stuff. So that's great. Eternal Witness, the classic, 1 green for a human shaman. It's a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. That's great. Allows us to get back some of the cards from our graveyard that aren't as easy to get back, such as the enchantments and artifacts, but it still gets us back whatever instant or sorcery or relevant thing that we need, card advantage, whatever. I don't really need to tell you why Eternal Witness is good. Plan the Heist, 2 blue for a sorcery. Surveil 3 if you have no cards in hand, which hopefully doesn't happen to you. And then you draw 3 cards. So it's 4 mana, draw 3 cards, basically. But importantly, it has Plot for 3 and a blue. Woohoo, we got to a plot card. There is a plot card in the deck. This one works well with our commander. If we have our commander out, we can plot this for 2 mana, and then it becomes a 2 mana draw 3 on a later turn. Excellent. Works great with our deck. Sadie wanted to say hi to y'all. That's my dog. Works great with our deck. This one obviously seems very worth it. 4 mana draw 3 isn't even really that bad for what we're trying to do. So being able to plot it for 2 mana is excellent. That's what we want to do. We got to another plot card. Plot mentioned. Slick Shot Lockpicker. 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human rogue. When it enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback till end of turn. Its flashback is equal to its mana cost, and it has plot for 2 and a blue. Now that's pretty nice. Plot for 2 and a blue with our commander. That means we only plot it for a blue mana, and it's a Snapcaster Mage on a later turn when we have more mana available because we plotted it instead of paying its mana cost. Excellent card for this deck. From the early testing that I've done, this card has been excellent. One of the better cards in the deck for sure. Once again, giving our spells that don't normally have flashback. Flashback is very powerful, it turns out, such as Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. So yeah, excellent card. most of this effect is usually a lot more dollars, like Snapcaster Mage and that sort of stuff. So being able to fit it onto such an efficient card for this deck is excellent. Lastly, we have one more plot card for y'all. Visage Bandit. It's 3 and a blue for a 2/2 Shapeshifter Rogue, and it's a clone. Whenever it enters, you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature you control, except it's a Shapeshifter Rogue in addition to its other types, and it plots for 2 and a blue. So notably, kind of what I was talking about with Croaking Counterpart, a lot of the creatures that we have aren't necessarily things that we need to copy or want to copy, because the ones that we really want to copy, like Talrand and that sort of stuff, are some of them are legends anyway, Octavia, that sort of stuff. But we have enough good ones, such as Docent of Perfection, Archmage Emeritus, Murmuring Mystic, Eternal Witness, maybe even the Slickshot Lockpicker, and even some of the self-mill guys we don't even mind making copies of. But plot for being able to plot this for just a blue, a clone for 1 blue mana, that's just a little bit too of an efficient rate for me to pass up. So yeah, Visage Bandit making the cut here, which is great. That's our dedicated card advantage. Let's talk about some dedicated interaction I have to help round out the deck. I ended on 2 board wipes. There's a chance that you could want to add a third. I have one I would suggest in the considering section we'll get to here shortly. But the 2 I settled on currently are Azuri's Predation, which is 5 green, green, green for a sorcery. For each creature your opponents control, you get a 4/4 green beast creature token. Each of those beats fights a different one of those creatures. So this is going to clear out anything 4/4, anything with 4 toughness or smaller right off the bat. Anything that is smaller than a 4/4, you're going to get to keep a 4/4. And then anything bigger than a 4/4, the 4/4 is just going to go away and they're not really going to lose anything. What this generally plays out as is I have 10 4/4s. Your guys' boards are wiped except for a Sun Titan that lives or something. So yeah, this card is very powerful. Obviously, it's very mana intensive. If you're playing at pretty higher power, obviously you can't really afford to spend 8 mana on a board wipe that doesn't really even wipe the board all the way sometimes, and leaves you with a handful of 4/4s that your opponents might just wipe away anyway. So if you're playing in a meta, I mean, this goes without saying if you're playing a $25 deck, but if you're playing in a meta that has like the most powerful cards in the format, like Mana Crypts and Dockside Extortionist, Jessica's Wills, and Cyclonic Rifts and stuff like that, then obviously you're going to have a hard time. But in the average casual pod, where it's like precons and up, to not quite higher power, but like good decks, then you're gonna feel pretty good, and that's where this deck's gonna live mostly. That's my target sort of audience here, and in those sort of environments, Azuri's Predation definitely shines. Here's a card people forgot about, but is extremely good. It's Oversimplify. It's 3 green blue for a sorcery. Exile all creatures, which is nuts for blue green. Each player creates a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and puts a number of 1/1 counters on it equals to the total power of creatures they controlled that were exiled this way. So all creatures get exiled forever. They ain't coming back. They're gone for 5 mana. That's pretty nuts. And then everybody just gets a stupid vanilla big idiot that everybody just like chumps with, trades with. If something's ever scary, you just need 1 removal spell to get rid of it. It's a token. You can bounce it, do whatever. Yeah, Oversimplify is extremely powerful. If you guys are playing blue-green and you need a board wipe, please give this one a shot. This one is nice. Most things that we're doing are spell slinger. We don't really commit to the board that much outside of creating some tokens here and there. And some of our even token generators aren't even creatures that will get caught up in this. So Oversimplify is a very strong board wipe. I'm always been very impressed with it. I run it in non-budget decks. It's nuts. This card is nuts if you haven't tried it. Yeah, even in the chat, Oversimplify is sick. Yeah, absolutely. Oversimplify is nuts. Reality Shift, a classic. I'm really happy this one's finally hit budget. That's where it belongs. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. Exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. So you exile whatever the problem is for 2 mana. That's huge. And they just get some stupid vanilla 2/2 that most likely is not going to do anything because everybody loves ETBs. So even if they flip it over, it's probably just going to be like a vanilla 5/5 at that point or something. So Reality Shift has never looked better. Resculpt, an even better version of that card. 1 and a blue for an instant exile target artifact or creature, which is nuts. I don't know why blue's exiling artifacts, but here we are. Its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. I don't know if you know this, but the reason Beast Within and Generous Gift is good is because vanilla 3/3s don't matter. Vanilla 4/4s also don't matter. Exiling whatever the problem is for 2 mana. Artifacts are everywhere. They're very powerful. Creatures are everywhere. They're very powerful nowadays. Resculpts, amazing. Dedicated removal. I basically run it in every blue deck, budget or not. All right, let's move into ramp. We have a few interesting ramp cards. They're not hyper efficient. We do have some very efficient ramp spells, but we do run a few that are 3 mana, but they also have flashback, so that way we can cast them twice. So first we have Deep Reconnaissance. It's 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. Obviously not a very good rate, but it has flashback for 4 and a green. So with our commander, we can cast it again for the same mana cost. Importantly, this is a spell that we can cast for our graveyard that generates this value. Even if it's a little mana intensive, that is still plenty good enough. As you can see, we have lots of card draw in the deck, so we just need to get more mana. And the mana is, if we can get it on something that is already synergistic with our plan, such as going to the graveyard where we want stuff to go anyway, then that is what we want to do. So that's excellent. And basically the same card, Path to the Festival. The only difference is if you have 3 or more basics, you get to scry 1, but obviously we don't do that. It's essentially the same card. 3 mana to get a basic into play tapped, 5 flash them back. So yeah, these are really good role players for the deck. Ramping at 3 is not even bad for us. We don't really have to cast our commander on turn 2. A lot of times it might be better to wait, cast it, and then like flashback 2 spells. So if we have other things to do, like on turn 2, like casting a cantrip or setting up our mill or draw or something, ramping on turn 3 is not bad for us. We're not trying to rush people down and do crazy stuff like immediately. We're trying to build up a value engine over the first 3 to 4 turns of the game and then start converting that into board state and card advantage and that sort of stuff. So we got time to cast Deep Reconnaissance is what I'm saying. Next up, Farseek. I probably don't even need to read this one, but I'll go ahead anyway. It's 1 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for basically not a forest card and put it into play tapped. This can get you duels and stuff, which we do actually have some blue-green duels because our blue-green mana base is nuts because they keep printing all these good lands and precons, and now they're less than $1. But the ones that we'll be getting with this are like the snow duels and stuff like that. So same thing with Nature's Lore. 1 and a green for a sorcery. You search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. If you need the mana right now, you can go get a basic forest. That's great. If you don't need the mana right now, you can go get one of the tap duels that we'll talk about shortly. Rampant Growth. I'm not going to read it. It's 2 mana and goes and gets you a basic into play tapped. Obviously great. Root Coil Creeper. This is a weird one that works amazing in our deck. It's green and a blue for a 2/2 plant horror. It taps for 1 mana of any color. That's great. It taps for 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to cast spells from your graveyard. That's what we're doing, man. That's great. It's just a super mana dork. And then if you really need to, it's got blue and a green and tap and exile it. Return target card with flashback you own from exile to your hand. This just does everything that we want. It's a super mana dork. It can buy us back card advantage if we're desperate when we have plenty of mana and nothing to do. This card's great. This is what we want to do. Rosethorn Acolyte. It's 2 and a green for a 2/3, and it taps for 1 mana of any color, but it also has Adventure for 1 green mana. Add 1 mana of any color. So this one may seem weird, but let me spell it out for you a little bit here. So with our commander, this card just costs 1 green mana. You pay the green mana on its, adventure. Now it's a card in exile, and you float a mana. You float a green mana. And then since it costs 2 less to cast from exile, you use that green mana just to cast this. So it's just 1 green mana to cast it. And notably, you could say, well, why don't you just run like a Birds of Paradise or whatever? Well, when you're on a budget, the only mana dorks that you have are like Llanowar Elves, which only make green mana, which I did try in the deck. I tried 1 green mana dorks, but I was having a hard time finding things to convert the green mana into. And it kind of felt like it was pulling away from some parts of the strategy that were spell slingery. Sure, it gave me a few more targets for like tapping at the window and that sort of stuff, but it just didn't feel good. It didn't feel like I had a good way to use all that green mana. And once again, we're not like a super fast, crazy deck. So I felt like having a little bit slower, more consistent, more fixy sort of mana, like this one, like the Deep Reconnaissance, like the Path to the Festival. This sort of mana ramp / fixing felt way better because we're definitely a lot heavier blue than we are green. So the Land of Worlds and those sort of ones didn't really fit the build very well. Soul Ring. Okay. It's time for my Soul Ring talk. Soul Ring. I don't think you should play it in your casual decks. This is fast mana. We have stigmas towards this. People don't like Moxen. People don't like Mana Crypt. Soul Ring's better than most of those, except for Mana Crypt. But for some reason, we just allow it to be in our casual games. I get it. It's everywhere. It's less than $1. It's cheap. I know why people run it because it's very powerful and it's just like, woohoo! I get the Soul Ring and now we get to have a non-game and I just get a free win. If I have a okay build, which I mean a lot of people don't, but that's what I'm here to teach you is how to build synergistic decks. But even on a budget, for the deck that I'm suggesting to you, because I don't expect most people to be able to work with their play groups at their LGSs and stuff to be like, oh, we shouldn't play Soul Ring. Most people just don't do that. Gamers just don't do that. We're a little antisocial. I get it. So for that reason, I would say you should put Soul Ring in your deck because it makes your deck so much better when you draw it. But I would suggest to you that you talk with your play group and just don't run Soul Rings and just run more interesting cards instead. Run another, 3 mana ramp spell or whatever. Run something interesting. Run another ramp spell that isn't Soul Ring, that doesn't make non-games and things that aren't interesting. That would be my suggestion. But for power reasons and for you to be able to take this down to your LGS and shake it up with other people, I'm going to put Soul Ring in the deck. So that's my one per video. You're always going to hear it every one of these videos, but there it is. Splendid Reclamation. Obviously, Soul Ring's the best card in the deck. I mean, no surprise to anybody. Splendid Reclamation. 3 and a green for a sorcery. Return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Obviously, this is so sick with our plan. Gives us tons of synergy and ramp and all sorts of stuff. It's a spell, so it triggers our Spell Slinger stuff. I'm so happy that this one's on a budget because they've been reprinting it. So that's great. I'm really happy with Splendid Reclamation. Now, I will say, when you're doing stuff like delving and escaping and eating cards from your graveyard, I'm not, just because you have this Splendid Reclamation in the deck, doesn't mean you shouldn't eat lands from your graveyard. For the most part, you want to eat lands or creatures from your graveyard. But it's just keep in mind that this card's in your deck. And maybe just don't chain eat every single land out of your deck. Try to obviously leave your flashback cards in your graveyard. Try not to eat those with your delves and escapes and such. But if you have some creatures in your graveyard, like maybe these clones that we were talking about earlier or whatever, that aren't going to come back on their own, and they're not things that you're going to want to buy back later, then obviously get rid of those, and then maybe eat some lands or some instants and sorceries that they don't flash back or want to flash back. So kind of play a little bit of all the sides. You'll learn a lot when you play this deck. So next we have Spring to Mind. Spring is a 2 and a green, so 3 mana total. Search your library for a basic land card, put into play tapped. So once again, same thing, Path of the Festival and Deep Reconnaissance. 3 mana is fine, time for us to ramp. And importantly, we have Mind for 4 blue. It's an instant with Aftermath, which means we can cast it from our graveyard, only from our graveyard, but we have to exile it afterwards, and it draws us 2 cards. 6 mana to draw 2, terrible rate. With our commander, 4 mana to draw 2, Inspiration's fine. We can live with that. We just want consistency. We want to be able to generate value from all these cards we're milling. And this one does 2 things that we want. I mean, neither is like that efficient, but they're both things that we want. They synergize with our game plan. They're 2 spells we can cast easily. Yeah, seems like a great fit. And then lastly, in this section for ramp, Thunderclap Drake. This one isn't like directly ramp, but you get it. Discount spells. It obviously makes us mana in the long run. This card is nuts, by the way. It's 1 and a blue for a 2/1 flyer. It's a Drake. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. That's obviously an insane effect. And then for 2 and a blue and sacrifice this, whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone in this game. So, I mean, just on the face value, just a 2 mana flyer that can chip in at planeswalkers or whatever, that discounts our spells by 1. That's sick. That's insane. That's what we want. Yeah, that's it. And then like 3 mana, if we don't need this thing anymore and we just need to like get some more card advantage or something else, then we can convert it into copy a spell. This card's nuts, by the way. You're going to see this card a lot in spell slingery decks. Okay, and then the last thing, we have a dedicated finisher in this deck. And this is a card that I've been loving in spell slingery decks because you just end up with so many instants and sorceries in your graveyard and in exile, and you just naturally want to have things that make tokens so that way you have some board presence that you can block with or whatever. This allows those random stupid 2/2 flyers and 1/1 insects and whatever to be lethal threats. This is Candlekeep Inspiration. It's 4 and a blue for a sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control have base power toughness XX, where X is the number of of cards you own in exile in your graveyard that are instants or sorcery cards and or have adventure. So it's worded very weirdly, but basically what it says, I mean, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here and just basically read the card. It counts instant sorceries in your graveyard and instants and sorceries in exile, which is very rare. But the fact that it counts in exile is obviously very important because when we flash back our cards, they go to exile. When we delve them away, they go to exile. So no matter what we do with them, they're going to get counted with Candlekeep Inspiration, which is nuts. Your creatures are going to be like 18/18s all the time, from my experience. And that's just, yeah. This card is, if you're in blue in your spell slingery deck and you need an overrun, this is a hell of an overrun. This kills people dead for sure. Okay. That's all the main cards in the deck. We're going to talk about the last section for the main deck. It's lands. It's just lands, bro section. It's just lands, bro. Notably, blue-green has been getting some heaters for budget. Obviously, we have the normal cards, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, but we've even gotten filter lands like Flooded Grove. This card's only 50 cents now. Hinterland Harbors, 40 cents. And then we have, the normal suite of like Simic Growth Chamber, Vinewood Falls for our Nature's Lures and our Farseeks, Tangled Islet for our Nature's Lures and our Farseeks. I threw a Temple in here because we can afford a few tap duels and scrying is nice. Snarls, I don't love them, but we have so many basics. We have 23 basics that this one's actually going to feel pretty good. But we even get Waterlogged Grove for 50 cents. This land is disgusting. This land is insane. Yavimaya Coast, we get Pain Lands. We've had Yavimaya Coast for a while, but we get other Pain Lands in budget. Yeah, we're eating good in budget right now. And then lastly, I threw in a War Room because I love this card. It taps for a colorless, and you can pay 3 and tap it and pay life equal to your commander's color identity, which is 2 here, to draw a card. This card is so good. When you have so much mana and you don't have anything to do with it, this converts your mana into card draw for a fairly efficient rate compared to like whatever the one from with Ascend is that's like 5 and tap it. There's a lot of versions of this effect. They're bad, but this one's like the least committal in terms of like what you need on board to work and trigger with it. And it's just like 2 life. Sure, dude. Whatever. I play this in like all my monocolor decks and I play it in most 2-color decks. And we have actually pretty good fixing, so I felt like we could afford a little utility land. And as well, Drown Yard Temple seems pretty cute in our deck. It taps for a colorless, or you could pay 3 mana and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if you self-mill it, you can get a little ramp. Probably won't do that too much. You'd probably just rather eat it with a Delve spell or something. But if you really need mana, this is pretty cute. All right, that's the main deck. That's Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius. Obviously, with the plan we've decided to go with is very spell slinger based, with flashback and graveyard casting at the helm of what we're trying to do. Lots of self-mill, lots of instant sorceries for flashback from our graveyard. We're trying to use those flashback and all those castings from our graveyard with a spell slinger payoff in order to generate more card advantage or board presence. And then we're trying to convert that into a win. So that's kind of what we've decided to plan on with Doc Arlock. Let's go into some of the things that didn't quite make the cut. I'm not going to go through all of them because this list is massive. Luckily, I made this deck ahead of time, obviously, unlike last week, which I'm going to keep doing because I'm very happy with the result compared to last week. But yeah, we ended with a lot of casualties. Basically, what it came down to is I was trying out a lot of different things like looters, caring about the number of instants and sorceries / creatures in your graveyard. I had to build with a bunch more creatures, so the tapping at the windows and stuff would hit a lot more reliably. I had some bigger sort of cards that you could flash back, like Splitting Image and Storm the Festival, Cackling Counterpart, Knot of the Bone is like once I was in the more had a lot more creatures in the deck. But it boiled down to just being not as synergistic, not as whole. I had very similar to the main deck. I was a little bit more focused in what I was trying to do, but I had a little bit too many pieces all over the place. I was trying to flash back all these cards, but I also wanted those cards in my graveyard. And the push and pull just didn't feel good. I just decided to lean into more consistency, play a few cards that were a little less efficient, but did what we wanted, like Spring to Mind and Deep Reconnaissance and that sort of stuff. And instead of trying to play like Mana Dorks and things that cared about having creatures in the graveyard and having cards that we wanted in our graveyard, but if we drew were terrible. So you're going to see a lot of different things like that in the deck. So yeah, that's kind of where I ended up. I'm very happy with the build that we ended up with. But a lot of these sort of cards in the considering section, I would say basically you'd have to retool the deck a lot. You can make this deck a lot more creature based, maybe run some of the adventure stuff, and just be happy with casting big vanilla idiots and leaning into like Garruk's Uprisings and stuff like that, and just leaning on the big creatures that come off of adventure or whatever. But I feel like that deck would not be able to punch up as much as this one. If you're playing in a pod that's specifically like trying to play precons or bulk decks and budget decks that are like hyper budget and stuff like that, and it's more of a casual environment, you could get away with playing the more dudes focused version of this deck. But this one can definitely get in the mix and play some real games of Magic. So overall, very happy with the way this deck turned out. Once again, if you enjoyed your time here, I'm streaming on Tuesdays, Tuesday Brewsday. Cheers to y'all. And the VOD goes up afterwards, obviously. I'm Blake. I'm the Highlander hipster. You can find my Discord below. You can find this deck list below. If you want to join the community, reach out, come talk to me. We like memes in the Discord. We like dicking around, having fun, playing on budget, playing with unique cards, build lots of unique decks. I don't like playing your run-of-the-mill stuff. So if any of that stuff sort of sounds interesting to you, like, comment, sub, algorithm stuff, you know what to do. But more importantly, come hang out in the Discord. Come kick it with us. So thank you for your time. Much love. Peace.